On the eve of a forced marriage, Rosalie Quinn steals a mysterious cowboy stallion to flee Cedar Bluff. But when a price is put on her head, one man may be her only hope. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The moon hung full and bright over Cedar Bluff as Rosalie Quinn slipped out the back door of her father's house. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure it would wake the whole town. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and moved quickly through the shadows, her boots making soft sounds on the dirt path. 22 years old and being sold off like cattle. That's what this arranged marriage was, a business deal. Her father, Edgar Quinn, had shaken hands with Harold Blackwood, the wealthiest cattle broker in the territory, and that was that. The engagement papers would be read tomorrow at church, and by spring, she'd be Mrs. Harold Blackwood, trapped in a marriage with a man 30 years her senior, who looked at her like she was another piece of property to acquire. Not if I can help it, Rosalie whispered to herself as she reached the edge of town. She had packed light, one change of clothes, her mother's brooch, and all the money she had managed to save over the years, tucked into a pouch sewn into her petticoat. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get her started somewhere far from Cedar Bluff. There was just one problem. She needed a horse. Rosalie had grown up around horses. Her father's trading business meant there were always animals coming and going. She could ride better than most men in town, though ladies weren't supposed to admit such things. But tonight she needed more than skill. She needed a fast horse that could carry her far. That's when she remembered the black stallion. She had seen him just yesterday, being ridden by that quiet man from the outskirts of town, Trace Mallory. The horse was magnificent, powerful, with a stride that ate up the ground. If any horse could get her away from Cedar Bluff, it would be that one. Trace Mallory's small ranch was a mile out of town. Rosalie had never spoken to the man. Few people had. He came to town only when necessary, bought what he needed, and left without fanfare. People said he'd fought in the war, lost his brother, and come back different. Some called him strange. Others called him dangerous. But Rosalie had seen how gently he handled his horses, and that told her more about a man than town gossip ever could. The small ranch was dark when she arrived. The house, little more than a cabin, sat quiet, no lights burning inside. Rosalie crept toward the small corral where she could make out the shapes of horses in the moonlight. And there he was, the black stallion. Even in the darkness he was impressive, his coat gleaming like polished coal. "Hello, beautiful," she whispered, approaching slowly. "I need your help tonight." The horse's ears flicked toward her voice. He snorted, pawing at the ground. Rosalie found a bridle hanging on the fence post. No time for a saddle. She'd ride bareback if she had to. She opened the gate slowly, wincing at the creak of the hinges. The stallion watched her, alert but not frightened. "That's it," she coaxed, holding out her hand. "Easy now." It took several minutes of soft talking, but the horse finally allowed her to slip the bridle over his head. Rosalie led him quietly out of the corral, her heart racing. She was really doing this, stealing a horse and running away. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not sure if she was apologizing to the horse or its owner. "But we both need to be free tonight." Using a fallen log as a mounting block, Rosalie swung herself onto the stallion's back. He shifted underneath her, clearly not used to a strange rider. "Easy now," she soothed. "We're going on an adventure." She turned the horse away from town and toward the hills, nudging him into a trot. Once they were far enough away, she gave him his head, and he broke into a gallop that took her breath away. His power was incredible, each stride eating up the ground beneath them. For the first time in months, Rosalie felt something like joy. The wind whipped through her hair and the stars blurred above her. She was escaping. She was free. They rode for hours, climbing higher into the hills. Rosalie had a vague plan to reach the next town over, find work as a seamstress or cook, and start a new life where no one knew her, where no one owned her. But as the sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, she realized the horse was becoming increasingly difficult to control. "Whoa!" she called, pulling on the reins. But the stallion tossed his head, fighting her commands. The trail had narrowed, with a steep drop to one side. Rosalie felt a flash of fear as the horse sidled closer to the edge, still fighting her control. Please, she begged, pulling harder. Stop! Whoa! The horse reared suddenly, nearly throwing her. Rosalie clung to his mane, desperate to stay mounted. If she fell here, it would be a long way down. That's when she heard the whistle, sharp and commanding. The horse's ears pricked. Forward. He whinnied and stopped fighting, though he still danced nervously in place. Grief, a man's voice called. Stand! The black stallion immediately stilled, though Rosalie could feel him trembling beneath her. She looked up to see a man standing, a few yards away on the trail. Even in the dim pre-dawn light, she recognized him, Trace Mallory. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that fell to his shoulders and a face weathered by sun and wind. He wore simple clothes, worn trousers, faded blue shirt, and a leather vest. No gun that she could see, which was unusual for a man out alone at dawn. Rosalie froze, her mind racing. Would he shoot her for horse theft, drag her back to town? She was suddenly aware of how this looked. Her in her nightdress with only a ice shawl on his horse miles from town at dawn, but Trace Mallory just stood there looking at her steadily. You stole my horse, he said finally. His voice was low and rough, as if he didn't use it often. Rosalie swallowed hard. I was going to bring him back. The lie fell flat between them. They both knew she had been running. Trace moved forward slowly, hands visible. Grief isn't an easy horse to ride, he said, reaching for the reins. Especially near drops like this one. Rosalie reluctantly let him take the reins from her trembling hands. She expected anger, but his face remained calm. You're Edgar Quinn's daughter, he said. It wasn't a question. Rosalie, she supplied, lifting her chin. And yes, I took your horse. Are you going to turn me in? Trace studied her for a long moment. His eyes were the color of the sky just before a storm, a deep, turbulent blue. You're running from something, he said. Someone, she corrected. My father is forcing me to marry Harold Blackwood. The papers are being read at church today. Understanding flashed across his face. Everyone in Cedar Bluff knew Harold Blackwood. His wealth, his power, and his reputation for treating his horses better than his previous 2 wives. Blackwood is twice your age, Trace said. 3 times nearly, Rosalie replied bitterly. But he has money, and that's all that matters to my father. Trace looked up at the lightening sky, then back at her. You won't get far on a stolen horse. They'll hang you for horse theft, woman or not. Rosalie felt tears sting her eyes. He was right, of course. What had she been thinking? She was desperate, not stupid. Then I'll walk, she said, starting to slide off the horse. Trace put a hand on her knee, stopping her. The touch was light but firm. The sun's coming up. You're miles from anywhere, wearing a nightdress. You won't last the day. The reality of her situation crashed down on Rosalie. She had acted impulsively, without a real plan. Now she was stranded in the hills with a man she barely knew, who had every right to be furious with her. To her surprise, Trace reached into his saddlebag. She now noticed his own horse, a chestnut mare tied to a tree nearby, and pulled out a canteen. Drink, he said, offering it to her. You must be thirsty. Rosalie took the canteen with shaking hands and drank deeply. The water was cool and sweet. Thank you, she said, handing it back. Trace nodded. He seemed to be considering something, looking from her to the trail ahead and back to town. They'll be looking for you soon, he said, and for Grief. Rosalie felt the hopelessness of her situation sink in. I can't go back, she said, her voice breaking. I won't marry him. Trace was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that changed everything. You can ride farther with me than you ever will alone. Rosalie stared at him, not sure she'd heard correctly. What? I have a cabin, he said. Further up in the hills, no one goes there. You could stay for a while, until you figure out what to do next. Why would you help me? Rosalie asked suspiciously. I stole your horse. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Grief chose to let you ride him. He doesn't let just anyone do that. I don't understand. Trace shrugged. I don't much like Harold Blackwood, he said simply, or men who trade women like cattle. Rosalie studied him, trying to see beyond his calm exterior. Everything she'd been taught warned her against trusting a man she barely knew, especially one with Trace Mallory's reputation for being a loner. But something in his steady gaze made her believe him. What's the deal? She asked. No one offered something for nothing, especially not to a woman alone. You help with the work, he said. Cooking, cleaning, I have animals to tend. It's not an easy life. And in return, you get shelter, safety, time to think about where to go next, he paused. And I won't tell anyone I've found you. It wasn't much of a choice. Go back to Cedar Bluff and a loveless marriage, or take a chance on this quiet stranger. All right, Rosalie said finally. I accept your deal. Trace nodded once, as if the matter was settled. We should go. The sun's coming up and people will be about soon. He helped her dismount from grief, his hands strong but gentle on her waist. Once her feet touched the ground, he immediately stepped back, giving her space. My cabin is a few hours' ride from here, he said, checking Grief's bridle. Can you ride the mare? She's gentler than Grief. Rosalie nodded. I've been riding since I could walk. Something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. He helped her mount the chestnut mare, again keeping his touch brief and respectful. What's her name? Rosalie asked, settling into the saddle. Lily, Trace answered, swinging up onto Grief's back with practiced ease. They rode in silence as the sun crested the hills, painting the landscape in gold. Rosalie couldn't help glancing back in the direction of Cedar Bluff, wondering what was happening. There, by now her father would have discovered her missing. The church would be filling with people, waiting to hear the engagement announcement. Having second thoughts? Trace asked, noticing her backward glance. Rosalie shook her head firmly. No. There's nothing for me back there but chains. He nodded, seeming to understand. Freedom has its own kind of burden, he said quietly. But at least it's one you choose. They rode deeper into the hills, following trails that grew increasingly narrow and overgrown. Trace led the way, occasionally pointing out features of the land or warning of difficult terrain ahead. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words were thoughtful and direct. By midday, they reached a small valley tucked between two ridges. A clear stream ran through it, and nestled against the hillside was a cabin made of rough-hewn logs. It wasn't large, but it looked solid and well-maintained. A small corral stood nearby, with a lean-to shelter for the horses. A chicken coop sat to one side, and Rosalie could see a small garden plot behind the cabin. It's not much, Trace said as they approached, but it's peaceful. It's lovely, Rosalie said honestly. After the suffocating confines of her father's house in town, the open valley felt like paradise. They dismounted, and Trace showed her where to tie Lily. I'll take care of the horses, he said. You can go inside if you want. The inside of the cabin was simple but clean. One main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace on one wall. A curtain at the back partially concealed what must be a sleeping area. There was a table with two chairs, a few shelves with books and supplies, and hooks on the walls for clothes and tools. Rosalie stood in the center of the room, suddenly uncertain. What had she done? Run away from one man's house only to end up in another's? The door opened and Trace came in, carrying her small bundle of belongings that she'd tied to Grief's bridle. You can put your things there, he said, pointing to a small chest near the curtained area. I'll sleep out here by the fire. You can have the bed. Rosalie stared at him. I can't take your bed. Trace shrugged. I've slept worse places. He moved to the fireplace, adding wood and stirring the banked coals to life. Are you hungry? There's bread and some dried meat. I can make coffee. The normalcy of the offer, so domestic and ordinary, made Rosalie want to laugh or cry. She wasn't sure which. 24 hours ago, she had been preparing for an engagement she dreaded. Now she was in a mountain cabin with a man the town called strange, being offered coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world. Yes, she said finally. Coffee would be nice, and I can cook like we agreed. I'm actually quite good at it. Trace nodded. Today you rest. It's been a long night for you. As he moved around the small kitchen area, putting coffee onto boil and slicing bread, Rosalie watched him. His movements were efficient, economical, no wasted motion. He didn't speak unless necessary, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. Why are you really helping me? She asked suddenly. The truth. Trace paused, his back to her. For a long moment he was silent. Then he turned, his blue eyes meeting hers directly for the first time. Everyone deserves a chance to choose their own path, he said simply, even if it starts with stealing a horse. There was something in his voice, a deep understanding of what it meant to be trapped, to need escape so badly you'd risk everything. Rosalie felt tears prick her eyes again, but she blinked them away. "Thank you," she said softly. Trace just nodded, turning back to the stove. But in that brief moment of connection, Rosalie felt something shift between them, the beginning of trust, fragile as a new spring leaf. Outside, the sun climbed higher in the sky. In Cedar Bluff, they would be searching for her by now. Harold. Blackwood would be furious, her father mortified. But here in this quiet valley, with the sound of the stream and the gentle movements of a man who asked nothing of her but work, Rosalie felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Peace. She knew it wouldn't last. She knew there would be consequences for what she'd done. But for now, sitting at a rough wooden table, with a cup of strong coffee warming her hands, watching Trace Mallory move quietly around his cabin, Rosalie allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found more than just a temporary hiding place. Maybe she had found a beginning. The bread Trace offered was fresh, likely baked just yesterday. The dried meat was flavorful, spiced with herbs she couldn't quite identify. They ate in companionable silence, the fire crackling in the hearth. "You should rest," Trace said when they'd finished. "You've been up all night." Rosalie nodded, suddenly, aware of how exhausted she was. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night was fading, leaving her drained. Trace showed her to the curtained area. The bed was simple, a straw mattress covered with clean linens and a quilt that had clearly been mended many times. "I'll be outside tending to the animals," he said. "There's water in the pitcher if you want to wash." He left her alone, pulling the curtain closed behind him. Rosalie sat on the edge of the bed, listening to his footsteps cross the cabin floor and the sound of the door opening and closing. This was madness, she thought. She was alone in a cabin with a man she barely knew, miles from anywhere. But somehow she wasn't afraid. Not of Trace Mallory, anyway. She was afraid of what would happen when they found her. And they would find her eventually. Cedar Bluff wasn't the kind of town that let a woman escape her fate so easily. But that was a worry for tomorrow. Today she would rest. She would gather her strength. And she would be grateful for this unexpected shelter, however temporary it might be. Rosalie lay down on the bed, pulling the quilt over her. The pillow smelled of pine and something else, a clean, masculine scent that must be Trace. It was oddly comforting. As she drifted towards sleep, her last thought was of grief, the magnificent black stallion, and how he had carried her toward freedom, and of the quiet man with storm blue eyes who had offered water instead of judgment, shelter instead of chains. "Thank you," she whispered again to the empty room, and then she slept, deeper and more peacefully than she had in years. Outside, Trace Mallory leaned against the corral fence, watching his horses graze. He glanced at the cabin, thinking of the woman sleeping inside. She was brave, he'd give her that. Foolish, maybe, but brave. Running from a fate others would have accepted without question, he understood more than she knew. He too had run once, in his own way. After the war, after losing his brother, he couldn't bear to return to his old life. So he had come here, to this hidden valley, to find peace in solitude. But now the solitude was broken by a woman with fire in her eyes and dirt on her nightdress who had dared to steal his horse and ride for freedom. "What have you gotten yourself into, Mallory?" he murmured to himself. But even as he asked the question, he knew the answer. He had offered sanctuary to a woman who needed it, just as others had once offered it to him. The risks were great, but some things were worth risking everything for. Freedom, choice, the right to determine your own fate. Trace looked up at the bright blue sky, feeling the sun warm on his face. For the first time in a long while, he felt something stir inside him, something he had thought long dead. Hope. It was a dangerous feeling. Hope could break a man faster than despair. But as he turned back to his chores, Trace found himself wondering what tomorrow would bring, with Rosalie Quinn under his roof. And for once, the wondering didn't feel like dread. It felt like possibility. The sun was high in the sky when Rosalie woke. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was. Then it all came flooding back, her escape, stealing the horse, meeting Trace Mallory, and coming to this cabin. In the hills, she sat up, pushing her tangled hair from her face. Through the small window, she could see it was well past noon. She had slept for hours. Rosalie straightened her nightdress as best she could and pulled her shawl around her shoulders. She needed proper clothes, but that would have to wait. For now she needed to face her new reality. She pushed aside the curtain and stepped into the main room of the cabin. Trace wasn't there, but a fire still burned low in the hearth, and she noticed a pot of something hanging over the coals. The smell of beans and bacon filled the small space. On the table was a neatly folded pile of clothing with a note on top. Rosalie picked up the paper and read the simple message. These might fit. Back by sunset. Help yourself to food. The clothes were men's. A faded blue shirt and trousers that would be too big, but infinitely better than her nightdress. There was even a belt to cinch the pants. Rosalie changed quickly, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs. The fabric was soft from many washings, and though the clothes hung on her slender frame, she felt more like herself in them than she had in the dresses her father insisted she wear. She found a comb on a shelf and worked the tangles from her long brown hair, braiding it loosely over one shoulder. Then she ladled some of the bean stew into a bowl and sat at the table to eat. The stew was simple but good, the beans tender, and the bacon adding a smoky flavor. As she ate, Rosalie considered her situation. She had escaped Cedar Bluff and her impending marriage, but for how long? Surely they would search for her. Her father wouldn't accept the humiliation of his daughter running away, and Harold Blackwood wasn't a man who took rejection lightly. But for now, she was safe, hidden away in this valley with a man who seemed to want nothing from her except help with chores. It was more freedom than she'd known in years. After eating, Rosalie washed her bowl and spoon in a basin of water she found on the counter. Then, curious about her surroundings, she stepped outside. The afternoon sun was warm on her face. The valley was even more beautiful in full daylight, green and lush, with the stream sparkling as it wound through. The air smelled of pine and wildflowers, so different from the dusty streets of Cedar Bluff. Movement caught her eye, and she turned to see Lily, the chestnut mare, watching her from the corral. Grief was nowhere to be seen. Trace must have taken him on whatever errand kept him away until sunset. Rosalie approached the corral fence. "Hello, Lily," she said softly. The mare eyed her cautiously, not moving closer, but not running away either. "I'm not going to steal you two," Rosalie assured her with a small smile. "One horse theft is enough for now." She noticed the water trough was low. Remembering her agreement to help with chores, she found a bucket near the well and drew fresh water for the horse. As she poured it into the trough, Lily approached, her ears forward with interest. "There you go," Rosalie said. "Fresh water." The mare drank, then lifted her head, water dripping from her muzzle. She studied Rosalie with intelligent eyes. "You know," Rosalie said conversationally, "you're the first horse I've talked to since my father sold Thunder." Thunder had been her horse since she was 12, a spirited pinto that her father had finally declared too wild for a lady and sold to a passing trader. Rosalie had cried for days. Lily snorted as if in sympathy. "I know," Rosalie said. "Men think they can just decide things for us, don't they?" "Well, not anymore." She reached out slowly, offering her hand for the mare to sniff. After a moment's consideration, Lily stretched her neck forward and gently nuzzled Rosalie's palm. "I think we're going to be friends," Rosalie said, smiling genuinely for the first time in days. She spent the next hour exploring the small homestead, always keeping the cabin in sight. There was a chicken coop with 6 hens pecking in the dirt. Rosalie collected 4 eggs, carefully placing them in the pocket of her borrowed shirt. The garden behind the cabin was small but well tended, with rows of vegetables, beans, carrots, potatoes, and onions. She pulled a few weeds, feeling oddly satisfied by the simple task. As the afternoon began to fade toward evening, Rosalie returned to the cabin, bringing the eggs with her. She found a skillet and decided to make supper. It was the least she could do in return for Tracy's hospitality. She built up the fire, sliced some potatoes and onions from a bin in the corner, and began cooking. The simple act of preparing food was soothing, a reminder that some things remained constant, even when everything else had changed. The door opened just as she was taking the skillet off the fire. Trace stepped inside, bringing with him the scent of pine and horses. He stopped short when he saw her at the stove, his eyes taking in her changed appearance, his clothes, her braided hair, her bare feet on the wooden floor. "You're cooking," he said as if surprised. Rosalie suddenly felt self-conscious. "I hope that's all right. I found eggs and vegetables." Trace nodded, setting down a canvas bag he'd been carrying. "It's fine. Smells good." He moved to wash his hands in the basin, then hung his hat on a peg by the door. Without the hat, his dark hair fell loose around his face, making him look younger than he had before. "I brought supplies," he said, gesturing to the bag. "Flour, coffee, dried apples. And these." He pulled out a bundle wrapped in brown paper and handed it to her. Rosalie unwrapped it to find a dress, simple cotton, pale blue, and a pair of women's boots. "Where did you get these?" she asked, running her fingers over the fabric. "Trading. Post at Miller's Creek," Trace answered. "About 10 miles east. The woman there is about your size. I said they were for my sister." Rosalie looked up at him, touched by the thoughtfulness. "Thank you, I'll pay you back somehow." Trace shook his head. "Part of our deal. You need proper clothes." He didn't mention that going to Miller's Creek was risky. People there might talk about the quiet rancher buying women's clothes. He didn't mention that he'd had to trade one of his best knives for the items. He simply began unpacking the rest of the supplies as if it were nothing special. They ate together at the small table, the potatoes and eggs Rosalie had prepared along with bread and dried beef. Trace contributed. The food was simple but satisfying. They ate mostly in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was a peacefulness to the cabin, to the rhythm of the day that made words seem unnecessary. After they finished eating, Trace surprised her by clearing the dishes himself. "Are you cooked?" he said simply when she tried to help. While he washed up, Rosalie changed into the dress behind the curtain. It fit well enough, a bit loose in the waist and tight across the chest, but clean and whole. The boots were more worn, but serviceable. When she emerged, Trace glanced at her, then quickly away, but not before she caught a flicker of something in his eyes. Appreciation, perhaps. "Better than my clothes," he said, his voice gruff. "Much," Rosalie agreed, "though yours were comfortable." A hint of a smile touched his lips, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines, making him look suddenly younger. "I spoke to some traders at Miller's Creek," he said, his expression growing serious again. "Word's already spread about you." Rosalie felt a chill. "What are they saying?" Trace leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "That Edgar Quinn's daughter ran away the night before her engagement. That Harold Blackwood is offering a reward for information." "How much?" Rosalie asked bitterly. $50. She laughed without humor. "Is that all I'm worth to him?" "It's enough to tempt people," Trace said, "especially with winter coming." Rosalie sank into a chair, the brief happiness she'd felt while exploring the homestead fading. "They'll find me eventually." "Not up here," Trace said with quiet confidence. "Few people know about this valley. Those who do have no reason to come this way. But you can't keep me hidden forever," Rosalie pointed out, "and I can't stay here indefinitely. That wasn't our deal." Trace was quiet for a long moment. "No," he agreed finally, "but you're safe for now, that's what matters." He moved to a chest in the corner of the room and opened it, removing something wrapped in cloth. He brought it to the table and set it down in front of Rosalie. "This might interest you," he said. Rosalie unwrapped the cloth to find a book, a leather-bound journal, the pages yellowed with age. "My mother's," Trace explained. "She kept a diary, most of her life." Rosalie looked up at him in surprise. "And you want me to read it?" Trace shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "You said you felt trapped in Cedar Bluff. My mother, she knew something about that. About wanting freedom." He turned away, busying himself with stoking the fire. "There's a lantern if you want to read. I'll be outside checking on the horses." After he left, Rosalie opened the diary carefully. The handwriting was neat and flowing, a woman's hand. She turned to the first page and began to read. April 12th, 1843. James asked me to marry him today. I said yes, though Ma thinks I'm a fool to follow a man into the wilderness. Perhaps I am. But I'd rather be a fool under an open sky than a sensible woman in a cage of convention. Rosalie felt a shiver of recognition. This woman, Trace's mother, had understood the longing for freedom, for a life not dictated by others' expectations. She read on, turning pages carefully. The diary chronicled the woman's journey west with her new husband, the hardships they faced, the joy of building a life together. And throughout, there was a fierce celebration of independence, of making one's own choices. June 3rd, 1847. My son was born today. We have named him Trace, after the faint line of stars his father followed to bring us safely through the mountains last winter. May he always find his way, even in darkness. Rosalie looked up from the page, suddenly understanding the significance of what Trace had shared with her. This wasn't just a book, it was his history, his mother's heart laid bare in ink and paper. Outside, she heard the soft sounds of Trace moving around the corral, speaking quietly to the horses. She set the diary aside and wrapped it carefully, in its cloth covering, feeling she had been given a rare gift. When Trace returned, she was sitting by the fire, watching the flames dance. He glanced at the wrapped diary, then at her. "Thank you," she said simply, "for sharing that with me." He nodded, pouring himself a cup of coffee from the pot still warming by the fire. "She was a remarkable woman. Died when I was 15. Fever took her." "I'm sorry," Rosalie said. "My mother died when I was 10. I barely remember her." Trace sat in the chair opposite hers, cradling his coffee cup in work-roughened hands. "What do you remember?" The question surprised her. It had been years since anyone had asked about her mother. Her father had packed away all reminders of his wife after her death, as if to erase her from their home. "Her laugh," Rosalie said after a moment. "It was so bright like sunlight, and she used to sing while she worked. Old songs from Ireland, where her family came from." Trace listened, his blue eyes intent on her face. "She taught me to ride," Rosalie continued, the memories flowing more easily now. "Father didn't approve, said it wasn't ladylike, but she insisted every woman should know how to handle a horse. 'Your freedom might depend on it someday,' she told me." She looked up, suddenly struck by the prescience of her mother's words. "I guess she was right." Trace's expression softened. Mothers often are. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, and the chorus of night insects had begun. "What will you do?" Trace asked finally. "If you don't go back to Cedar Bluff?" Rosalie had been asking herself the same question all day. "I'm not sure. Find work in a bigger town, perhaps. I can sew well enough to be a seamstress, or cook in a boarding house. And if Blackwood keeps looking for you," she shrugged, trying to appear braver than she felt, "I'll keep moving. There's a whole world beyond Cedar Bluff, beyond the territory even." Trace studied her, his expression unreadable. "It's not easy," he said quietly. "Being alone, making your own way. Is that why you're here?" Rosalie asked. "Alone in this valley?" Something flickered in his eyes. Pain quickly masked. "Partly." "The war?" she prompted gently. Trace set his coffee cup down, his movements deliberate. "My brother and I both fought. He didn't come home." "I'm sorry," Rosalie said again, feeling the inadequacy of the words. "We had a ranch," Trace continued, his voice low, "south of Cedar Bluff. After the war, I couldn't. The neighbors looked at me different. Kept asking where John was, why I came back, and he didn't. So you left," Rosalie finished for him. Trace nodded. "Found this place. Built the cabin. It's quiet here." "Lonely," Rosalie observed. His eyes met hers. "Usually." The single word hung in the air between them, charged with meaning neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Trace stood abruptly. "It's late. You should rest. Tomorrow there's work to do." Rosalie nodded, recognizing his need to retreat from the moment of vulnerability. "Good night, then." "Good night, Rosalie," he said, and the sound of her name in his low, rough voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. She made her way to the curtained sleeping area, changing back into her nightdress behind the privacy of the fabric. As she lay in the darkness, listening to Trace moving quietly about the cabin, she thought about the day, about collecting eggs and watering Lily, about cooking a simple meal, about reading the words of a woman who had chosen freedom over convention. It was a simpler life than she had known in Cedar Bluff, but somehow richer. Here every task had purpose. Every choice was her own. She fell asleep to the sound of the fire crackling and Trace's soft footsteps, feeling safer than she had in years. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Rosalie rose early, often finding that Trace had already been up for hours, tending to the animals or working in the small field behind the cabin. They shared breakfast, usually bread and coffee, sometimes eggs if the hens were generous. Then they would work, each to their own tasks. Rosalie took over the cooking and cleaning, finding satisfaction in keeping the small cabin tidy. She gathered eggs, tended the garden, and learned to make bread in the iron pot over the fire. Trace showed her how to chop wood for the stove, his hands guiding hers on the axe handle, his body warm behind her as he demonstrated the proper swing. In the afternoons, Trace would often disappear for hours, returning with game for their supper or news from his occasional carefully distanced encounters with traders or travelers. Rosalie spent those hours exploring the valley, always careful to stay close enough to the cabin to retreat if needed. Or she would sit with Lily, who had grown increasingly friendly, allowing Rosalie to brush her mane and even eventually to ride her around the corral. "She likes you," Trace observed one evening, watching from the fence as Rosalie led Lily through her paces. "She doesn't usually take to strangers." "We understand each other," Rosalie said, patting the mare's neck. "Don't we, girl?" Lily nickered, softly, as if in agreement. A ghost of a smile touched Trace's lips, one of those rare expressions that transformed his face, making him look younger, less burdened. Rosalie had begun to treasure those moments, finding herself doing small things, just to coax that hint of a smile from him. They didn't speak often of Cedar Bluff or what had been left behind there. But one evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Trace brought news that shattered their peaceful routine. "Blackwood's put a bounty on you," he said without preamble. $100 for your return." Rosalie felt her blood run cold. $100, that's a fortune to most folk around here, Trace finished grimly, and he specified the terms. "What terms?" Rosalie asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Trace's jaw tightened. "Alive," he said, "but unspoiled." The implication was clear. Harold Blackwood still intended to marry her, still considered her his property, but he wanted to make sure no other man had claimed what he considered his right. "He can't do that," Rosalie whispered, though she knew he could. "Men like Blackwood made their own rules." "He has," Trace said, "and people are looking. A trapper I spoke with yesterday said there are men combing the hills. They've been as far as Miller's Creek." Fear gripped Rosalie's heart. "How long before they come here?" "They won't find this valley easily," Trace assured her. "The trail in is hidden, and I've been careful not to leave signs. But eventually we'll need a better plan," he agreed. "But for now, you're safe." Rosalie stood, pacing the small confines of the cabin. "I've put you in danger. If they find me here, they'll say you kidnapped me. Or worse." Trace watched her, his blue eyes steady. "It was my choice to help you." "Why?" she demanded, whirling to face him. "Why risk everything for a woman who stole your horse? A stranger?" Trace was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, moving to the small shelf where he kept his few books. He pulled out a folded paper and handed it to her. "This came with my brother's things," he said. "After." Rosalie unfolded the paper. It was a letter, the handwriting cramped and hurried, the paper stained with what might have been blood. "Trace," it began. "If you're reading this, I didn't make it. Don't blame yourself. We both chose this fight. But I need to ask one thing. Help Mary. She'll be alone now, and her father never approved of us. Give her the chance we planned for. Your loving brother, John." Rosalie looked up. "Mary?" "His sweetheart," Trace explained. "They were to marry when he returned. Her father had arranged a match with another man, but they were going to run away together." "What happened to her?" Trace's face darkened. "By the time I got home, it was too late. Her father had already married her off. She Died in childbirth a year later. Understanding dawned on Rosalie. So when you found me, I couldn't save Mary, Trace said simply, but I could help you. Rosalie felt tears sting her eyes. I'm so sorry about your brother, about Mary. Trace shook his head. It was a long time ago, but the pain in his eyes told her it wasn't nearly long enough. That's why you left your ranch, Rosalie said, not just because of the neighbors asking questions. Too many ghosts, Trace agreed. Too many reminders of promises I couldn't keep. Impulsively, Rosalie reached out and took his hand. His skin was warm, calloused from years of hard work. He stiffened slightly at her touch, but didn't pull away. You kept your promise, she said softly, through me. Their eyes met and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection deeper than words. Trace, she whispered, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth of his hand in hers. He looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face. Something in his expression had changed, softened. Rosalie, he said, her name, a rough whisper. The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Then from outside came the sound that shattered it all, the distant but unmistakable barking of dogs. Trace moved to the window, every line of his body suddenly alert. Hunting dogs, he said grimly, still far off, but heading this way. The warmth of the moment was gone, replaced by cold fear. They've found us, Rosalie said. Not yet, Trace corrected, but they will, if we stay here. He moved quickly around the cabin, gathering supplies. We need to leave now. Pack only what you need. Where will we go? Rosalie asked, already moving to collect her few belongings. Trace paused, looking at her steadily. Wherever you want. I told you when we met. You can ride farther with me. Then you ever will alone. You'd leave your home for me? It's just a cabin, he said. Freedom is worth more. The dogs barked again, closer now. Trace handed Rosalie a small pack. Hurry. We'll take the back trail up to the ridge. If we can make it to the high country, we can lose them in the pine forest. As they rushed to prepare, Rosalie felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. Once again she was running, but this time she wasn't alone. This time she rode with a man who understood what freedom meant and was willing to risk everything to help her keep it. The night was clear and cold as Trace and Rosalie fled the cabin. A bright moon illuminated the trail, both a blessing and a curse. They could see their way, but so could their pursuers. The barking of the dogs grew fainter as they climbed higher into the hills, but Rosalie knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Dogs could follow a scent for miles, especially trained hunting hounds. They rode single file along the narrow trail, Trace leading on Grief, Rosalie following on Lily. The horses moved surely despite the darkness, familiar with the terrain. Trace had packed quickly but efficiently, food, blankets, a small pot for cooking, his rifle and ammunition. Rosalie carried her few possessions in a sack tied to Lily's saddle, including the blue dress Trace had bought her and his mother's diary, which he had insisted she take. It belongs with you now, he had said gruffly as they prepared to leave. She would have wanted that. They rode for hours, climbing steadily higher into the mountains. The pine forest grew thicker, the air cooler. Occasionally they would stop to listen, but the dogs seemed to be falling behind. We're crossing streams whenever we can, Trace explained during one such pause. It confuses the scent, and the pine needles don't hold tracks well. Rosalie nodded, too exhausted to speak. She had never ridden so far in one stretch, and every muscle in her body ached. But fear kept her going, fear of what would happen if Harold Blackwood's men caught up to them. Near dawn, they reached a small clearing high on a ridgeline. Below them, the valley spread out, still shrouded in pre-dawn mist. In the far distance, Rosalie could just make out the faint lights of Cedar Bluff. We'll rest here for a few hours, Trace said, dismounting stiffly. The horses need it, and so do you. Rosalie didn't argue. She slid from Lily's back, her legs nearly buckling as her feet hit the ground. Trace caught her arm, steadying her. Are you? She said, acutely aware of his hand on her arm, of how close they were standing in the grey light of dawn. He nodded, releasing her, and turning to care for the horses. Rosalie watched him, struck by how different he seemed from the quiet, solitary man she had first met. There was a new energy to him, a purpose in his movements that hadn't been there before. "You're staring," he said without looking up from unsaddling grief. Rosalie felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was just thinking how different you seem." "Different how?" he asked, glancing at her. "More alive," she said honestly. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Maybe I am." They made a small smokeless fire using dry pine needles and branches. Trace produced jerky and hard biscuits from his pack, along with a small tin of coffee. "No proper coffee pot," he apologized. "Boiling water." "In the small cooking pot instead." "It'll have to do." "After the night we've had, I'd drink mud if it was hot," Rosalie said, wrapping her hands around the tin cup he offered her. That earned a real smile, brief but genuine. Rosalie felt an odd flutter in her chest at the sight. It still surprised her each time she coaxed one of those rare expressions from him. They ate in companionable silence, watching the sunrise paint the valley below in shades of gold and pink. It was beautiful, but Rosalie couldn't fully appreciate it, knowing somewhere out there men with dogs were hunting them. "What happens now?" she asked finally. Trace leaned back against a fallen log, cradling his coffee cup. "We keep moving. Head north, maybe. There are mining towns where no one asks questions about where you came from or why you're there. And then?" He looked at her, his blue eyes serious. "That depends on you." Rosalie wrapped her arms around her knees, suddenly cold, despite the growing warmth of the day. "I never meant to upend your life like this, to make you leave your home." "The cabin was just a place," Trace said. "I can build another. But everything you worked for can be replaced." His voice was firm. "Some things matter more." The way he looked at her made her heart beat faster. What was he saying? That she mattered more than his home, his possessions. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. "Why are you really doing this, Trace?" she asked softly. "The truth. All of it." He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee as if the answers might be found there. Then he set the cup aside and met her eyes directly. "Because when I found you that morning, trying to control grief with dirt on your nightdress and wild in your eyes, I saw something I thought I'd lost forever." "What?" Rosalie whispered. "Courage," he said simply. "The courage to choose your own path no matter the cost. I'd forgotten what that felt like." He looked away toward the distant horizon. "After the war, after losing John and failing Mary, I just existed. The cabin, the valley, they were a place to hide, not a place to live until you stole my horse." He looked back at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "You woke something in me, Rosalie Quinn, something I thought was dead." Rosalie felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such raw honesty. In Cedar Bluff, conversation was a dance of propriety and hidden meanings. But here, with this man, words were as clear and true as the mountain streams. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. A shadow of a smile crossed his face. "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know the truth." He stood, gathering. "They're meager breakfast things. We should get moving. I want to reach the North Pass before nightfall." The moment had passed, but something had shifted between them. As they prepared to continue their journey, Rosalie found herself watching Trace, the sure way he handled. The horses, the strength in his movements, the quiet competence that defined everything he did, and she realized with a clarity that startled her that she was falling in love with this quiet, complicated man. The thought should have frightened her. She had fled Cedar Bluff to escape one man's claim on her. The last thing she should want was to give her heart to another. But Trace Mallory was different. He didn't seek to possess her. He wanted to see her free. And that, she was beginning to understand, was true love. They rode through the day, following game trails and old logging, paths that Trace seemed to know instinctively. The forest grew denser, the trees taller, blocking out much of the sunlight. It was cooler here in the high country, and Rosalie was grateful for the warm shawl Trace had insisted she bring. By late afternoon, they reached a rocky outcropping that offered a view of the trail behind them. Trace reined in grief and dismounted, helping Rosalie down from Lily. "Look," he said, pointing back the way they had come. In the distance, Rosalie could see tiny figures on horseback, moving along the trail they had followed that morning. "How many?" she asked, squinting against the sunlight. "5, maybe 6, Trace said grimly. "And dogs, they're persistent. I'll give them that." "They won't give up, will they?" Rosalie said, fear churning in her stomach. Trace looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Would you? If someone took something you considered yours?" "I'm not his," Rosalie said fiercely. "I never was." "I know that," Trace said, "but men like Blackwood don't see it that way. To him, you're property that was stolen, and he means to get it back." The blunt assessment should have offended her, but Rosalie appreciated Trace's honesty. He didn't sugarcoat the truth or treat her like a delicate flower who couldn't handle reality. "So what do we do?" she asked. "Keep running?" Trace frowned, looking back at their pursuers. "For now, but eventually we'll have to face them." The thought sent a chill through Rosalie. "What do you mean?" "I mean we can't run forever," Trace said. "Sooner or later we'll have to make a stand." He turned to look at her, his eyes serious. "But that's for later. Right now we need to reach the North Pass before dark. It's dangerous at night, too easy to lose the trail and go over a cliff." They remounted and continued on, pushing the horses as fast as they dared on the treacherous mountain paths. The sun began to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the trail. As they rounded a bend, Grief suddenly reared, nearly throwing Trace. Lily, following close behind, shied as well, dancing sideways in panic. "Whoa!" Trace called, fighting to control his stallion. "Easy, boy." Rosalie saw the cause of the horse's distress, a mountain lion crouched on a rock above the trail, its tawny body tense and ready to spring. Trace reached slowly for his rifle, but the movement caught the big cat's attention. With a snarling cry it leaped, not at them but across the trail and into the forest on the other side. But the damage was done. Grief, already spooked, reared again and bolted forward. "Trace!" Rosalie cried, watching in horror as horse and rider disappeared around the bend. Lily was still trembling beneath her, but Rosalie managed to calm her enough to urge her forward. They rounded the bend to find Trace dismounted, kneeling beside Grief. The stallion was standing but favoring his right front leg. "Is he hurt?" Rosalie asked, slipping down from Lily's back. Trace nodded, his face grim. "Stepped in a hole when he bolted. It's not broken, but he's strained something. He can't carry me, not on these trails." Rosalie bit her lip, looking back the way they had come. "Our pursuers will catch up soon." "I know." Trace stood, running a hand along Grief's neck soothingly. "We need to find shelter for the night. There's an old trapper's cabin not far from here. We can hole up there, give Grief a chance to rest, and if they find us," Rosalie asked. Trace's hand went to the rifle slung across his back. "Then we'll deal with that when it comes." The old trapper's cabin was little more than a shack, a single room with a dirt floor, a stone fireplace, and a roof that leaked in several places. But it had walls and a door that could be barred, which was all that mattered at the moment. They settled the horses in a small lean-to beside the cabin. Grief's leg was swollen, but after Trace bathed it in cold water from a nearby stream, the stallion seemed more comfortable. "He'll be all right with rest," Trace said as they entered the cabin. "But not tonight, maybe not tomorrow either." Rosalie looked around the dusty interior of the cabin. "So we're trapped here." "For now," Trace agreed. He began gathering wood for a fire. "Help me with this. It gets cold up here at night." They worked together in silence, gathering firewood, clearing debris from the cabin floor, making the place as habitable as possible. As the sun set, Trace lit a small fire in the fireplace, careful to keep it low so the smoke wouldn't be visible from a distance. The dancing flames cast flickering shadows across the cabin walls. Trace and Rosalie sat close to the fire, sharing a meal of jerky and the last of the biscuits. "We'll need to hunt tomorrow," Trace said. "If we're staying here for a while." "Do you think they'll find us?" Rosalie asked, staring into the flames. Trace was quiet for a moment. "Eventually," he said honestly. "Those dogs are good trackers." "Then what's the point?" Rosalie asked, sudden despair washing over her. "Why run at all if they're just going to catch us?" Trace looked at her, the firelight reflecting in his blue eyes. "Because every day of freedom is worth fighting for." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. And because some things are worth any risk. The way he looked at her made Rosalie's heart race. In the flickering firelight, his face seemed softer. The hard lines of worry and wariness smoothed away. "Trace," she whispered, not sure what she wanted to say, only knowing that something was building between them, something powerful and inevitable. He reached up, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Rosalie," he said softly. A sudden howl outside cut him off, the baying of a hound, much closer than either of them had expected. Trace was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand. "They're here," he said grimly. "Sooner than I thought." Rosalie stood too, fear and determination warring within her. "What do we do?" "We can't run," Trace said, checking his rifle. "Not with Grief injured. We have to make a stand." He moved to the cabin's single window, peering out into the darkness. "I count 4 men and 2 dogs. Blackwood's men?" Rosalie asked, joining him at the window. Trace nodded. "Bounty hunters, most likely. Hired guns." They watched as the men dismounted, tying their horses to trees at the edge of the small clearing. The dogs strained at their leashes, noses to the ground, following the scent right to the cabin. "They know we're here," Rosalie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." Trace moved away from the window, positioning himself by the door. "Stay back, away from the window and door." "What are you going to do?" Rosalie asked, fear evident in her voice. Trace's expression was grim. "Whatever. I have to." Before Rosalie could respond, a voice called from outside. "We know you're in there, Mallory. Come on out and bring the Quinn girl with you." Trace and Rosalie exchanged glances. How did they know his name? "No one needs to get hurt," the voice continued. "Blackwood just wants his woman back. There's $100 in it for you if you hand her over peaceful-like." Trace's jaw tightened. "You all right?" he asked Rosalie quietly. She nodded, though her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "I'm not coming out." Trace called through the door. "And neither is she. She's not property to be handed over." There was a pause, then a different voice, harder, colder. "Don't be a fool, Mallory. It's 4 against 1. You can't win this." "Maybe not," Trace agreed. "But I can make it costly." Another pause. Rosalie could imagine the men conferring outside, weighing their options. "Look," the first voice called again. "We don't want any bloodshed. Just send the girl out and we'll let you be. Blackwood's quarrel isn't with you." "It is now," Trace replied. Rosalie moved to his side, placing a hand on his arm. "I can't let you do this," she whispered. "They'll kill you." Trace looked down at her, his eyes fierce in the firelight. "I'm not giving you up, Rosalie. Not to Blackwood, not to anyone. But no." His voice was firm. "I promise to help you find freedom. I aim to keep that promise." Outside, the men were growing impatient. "You've got 5 minutes to reconsider." "Mallory," the cold voice called. "Then we're coming in." Trace turned to Rosalie, his expression softening. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "There's a trapdoor under that bearskin by the fireplace. It leads to a root cellar. If things go bad, I want you to hide there." "I'm not hiding while you fight for me," Rosalie protested. "Yes, you are," Trace insisted. "Because if something happens to me, you need to get away. Follow the stream north. It'll lead you to a trading post in 3 days' time. Ask for Samuel Wade. Tell him I sent you. He'll help you." Tears filled Rosalie's eyes. "Don't talk like that. Like you're not going to be there." Trace's hand came up to cup her face. "I'll do everything I can to make sure we both walk away from this, but I need to know you'll be safe no matter what." Before she could respond, a shot rang out, splintering the wooden door. "Time's up, Mallory," the cold voice shouted. "We're coming in." Trace pushed Rosalie behind him, raising his rifle. "Get to the trapdoor," he ordered. "Now!" "Trace, go!" Reluctantly, Rosalie moved toward the fireplace, pulling aside the bearskin to reveal the trapdoor beneath. She lifted it, finding a small space below, just large enough for one person to hide. Another shot hit the cabin, this one coming through the window. "They're trying to scare us out," Trace muttered, taking position by the wall beside the window. "Keep down." Rosalie crouched by the open trapdoor, torn between hiding as Trace had ordered and staying to help somehow. She had never felt so helpless, so responsible for another's fate. Outside, she could hear the men moving, surrounding the cabin. The dogs were barking furiously now, excited by the gunfire and the scent of their quarry so close. Last chance. "Mallory," the voice called. "Send her out now, or we burn you both out." Trace glanced at Rosalie, their eyes meeting across the small cabin. In that moment, something passed between them. An understanding, a promise, a declaration that needed no words. "I love you," Rosalie mouthed silently. A look of wonder crossed Trace's face, followed by a fierce determination. He nodded once, then turned back to the window. "You want her?" he shouted. "Come and take her." He fired a shot through the window, and the night erupted into chaos. Gunfire split the darkness, bullets thudding into the cabin walls. Trace returned fire methodically, each shot carefully placed. Rosalie heard a cry from outside. Trace had hit someone. But the gunfire continued, more intense now. A bullet splintered the wood beside Trace's head, sending fragments flying. One caught him across the cheek, drawing blood. "Trace," Rosalie cried, starting toward him. "Stay back," he ordered. "Never," taking his eyes from the window. The shooting paused. In the sudden silence, Rosalie could hear the men conferring again. "They're planning something," Trace said grimly, reloading his rifle. As if confirming his words, a flaming torch arced through the night, landing on the cabin roof. Within seconds, the dry wood began to catch. "They're burning us out," Rosalie said, fear clawing at her throat. Trace's expression was grim. "We need to move, now." He crossed to her side, helping her out of the trapdoor she'd been crouching beside. "Change of plans, we're going out the back way." "There's no back door," Rosalie pointed out. Trace moved to the rear wall of the cabin where rough boards were nailed together. "Not yet," he said, using the butt of his rifle to loosen one of the boards. As he worked, Rosalie could smell smoke. The fire was spreading quickly across the dry wooden roof. They had minutes at most. "What about the horses?" she asked urgently. "I'll get them," Trace promised, prying another board loose. "But you go first. Stay low, keep to the shadows, head for the stream." "I'm not leaving without you," Rosalie insisted. Trace paused, turning to look at her. His face was streaked with sweat and blood from the wood splinter, his eyes intense in the growing firelight. "I'll be right behind you," he promised. "But I need to know you're safe." The sincerity in his voice convinced her. Rosalie nodded, slipping through the narrow opening he had created. Outside, the night air was cool compared to the increasingly smoky cabin. She crouched in the shadows, watching as Trace widened the opening. "Go," he whispered. "I'll meet you at the big pine by the stream." Reluctantly, Rosalie turned and crept away from the cabin, staying low and using the trees for cover. Behind her, she could hear the men still focusing their attention on the front of the cabin, unaware that their quarry was escaping out the back. She reached the edge of the clearing and paused, looking back. The cabin roof was fully ablaze now, flames reaching into the night sky. Trace had disappeared, presumably heading for the lean-to where the horses were tied. Rosalie hesitated, torn between following his instructions and going back to help. Then she saw movement. Trace leading both horses around the side of the cabin, keeping to the shadows. Relief flooded through her. He was coming. They would escape together. But as she watched, one of the bounty hunters turned, catching sight of the movement. "There!" he shouted. "Around back!" Gunfire erupted again. Trace ducked, pulling the horses forward. They were panicked by the fire and the gunshots, difficult to control. "Run!" Trace shouted, seeing Rosalie still waiting at the edge of the trees. "Go!" This time she obeyed, turning and fleeing toward the stream. She could hear the sounds of pursuit, men shouting, dogs barking, more gunfire, and hoofbeats. Trace had mounted Grief, despite the horse's injury, and was galloping toward her, leading Lily. Rosalie reached the stream and splashed across, the cold water soaking her boots and the hem of her dress. On the other side stood a massive pine tree, the meeting place Trace had specified. She turned, watching as Trace approached, riding hard despite the uneven ground. Behind him, two of the bounty hunters were in pursuit, the dogs running ahead of them. Trace reached her, pulling Grief to a sliding stop. "Mount up," he ordered, holding Lily steady as Rosalie swung into the saddle. They rode together into the forest, following the stream. Behind them, the bounty hunters gave chase, but their horses were tired from the day's travel. While Lily was fresh and Grief was running on pure adrenaline, his injury temporarily forgotten, they pushed on through the night, putting distance between themselves and their pursuers. The forest grew denser, the trees closing around them like protective arms. Eventually, the sounds of pursuit faded, then disappeared altogether. Near dawn, they reached a small sheltered hollow beside the stream. Trace finally reined in, sliding from Grief's back with a barely suppressed groan of pain. "Are you hurt?" Rosalie asked anxiously, dismounting quickly. "Just a scratch," Trace said, but when he moved into a shaft of early morning light, Rosalie gasped. His left sleeve was soaked with blood. "That's not a scratch," she said, moving to his side. "You've been shot." Trace looked down at his arm as if noticing the wound for the first time. "Must have caught one as we were leaving," he said, his voice tight with pain. "Didn't feel it then." "Let me see," Rosalie insisted, helping him sit on a fallen log. She gently rolled up his sleeve, revealing a deep furrow across his upper arm where a bullet had grazed him. It was still bleeding steadily. "We need to clean and bind this," she said, tearing a strip from the hem of her petticoat. Trace watched as she worked, using water from the stream to clean the wound, then binding it tightly with the makeshift bandage. "You're good at that," he observed. "My father's ranch hands were always getting hurt," Rosalie explained. "I helped the cook tend to them when I was younger, before my father decided it wasn't ladylike." She tied off the bandage, her fingers lingering on his arm. "There, that should hold for now, but we need to find proper medical supplies." Trace nodded, looking around the hollow. "We should be safe here for a few hours. The stream will have covered our tracks and the dogs will have lost our scent." "And then?" "Then we keep moving north," Trace said. "Just like we planned." Rosalie sat beside him on the log, suddenly overwhelmed by all that had happened. The escape from the cabin, the gunfight, the desperate ride through the night, and Trace wounded because of her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "This is all my fault." Trace turned to her, his expression gentle, despite the pain and exhaustion etched on his face. "No," he said firmly. "This is Blackwood's fault and your father's for trying to sell you like property." He reached out with his good arm, taking her hand in his. "You have nothing to apologize for, Rosalie. Nothing." She looked up at him, tears blurring her vision. "You could have died back there." "But I didn't," he pointed out. "We both made it. Out this time," Rosalie said. "But what about next time?" "They won't stop hunting us, Trace. Not as long as Blackwood's reward stands." Trace was quiet for a moment, considering. "Then we need to make it not worth his while," he said finally. "How?" Rosalie asked. "He's a proud man. Being defied will only make him more determined." A thoughtful look crossed Trace's face. "Unless he believes you're no longer unspoiled." Rosalie felt heat rise to her cheeks as she understood his meaning. According to the terms of the bounty, Blackwood wanted her returned unspoiled, still a virgin, suitable for marriage. "You mean he needs to think that you and I—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Trace nodded, his own face coloring slightly. "If he believes that, you'd no longer be what he's looking for. His pride wouldn't let him marry a woman who'd been with another man." The idea made cold, practical sense, but something about it hurt Rosalie deeply. The thought that their growing feelings for each other could be reduced to a strategy, a way to defeat Blackwood's possessiveness. "I see," she said, withdrawing her hand from his. "A clever plan." Trace caught her hand again, holding it firmly. "Rosalie," he said, his voice low and intense, "I'm not suggesting we— that is, I wouldn't—" He took a deep breath, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I only meant that we could let people believe. We wouldn't actually have to." Rosalie couldn't help it. A small laugh escaped her at his discomfort. "Trace Mallory, I do believe you're blushing." He looked startled, then a reluctant smile tugged at his lips. "Maybe I am." The tension between them eased, replaced by something warmer, more tender. "What I'm trying to say," Trace continued, more composed now, "is that I respect you too much to suggest that. But if others believed it, it might keep you safe." "And you?" Rosalie asked. What would happen to you if people thought you had compromised me? Trace shrugged, then winced as the movement pulled at his wounded arm. It wouldn't be the first time people thought poorly of me. Rosalie studied him in the growing light of dawn, his strong profile, the determination in his eyes despite his exhaustion and pain, the gentle way he still held her hand. I meant what I said back there, she said softly. In the cabin. Trace looked at her, confusion in his eyes. What did you say? Rosalie realized he hadn't seen her mouthed words during the chaos of the gunfight. Heart pounding, she gathered her courage. I said, I love you. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and powerful. Trace stared at her, a mixture of wonder and disbelief on his face. Rosalie, he whispered. You can't. I can, she insisted. I do. You barely know me, he protested. I know enough, Rosalie said. I know you're a good man, a kind man, a man who would risk his life to help a woman he barely knew find freedom. She moved closer to him on the log, her eyes never leaving his. I know you talk to your horses like they understand every word. I know you read poetry by lamplight when you think no one is watching. I know you miss your brother every day, but never speak of it because the pain is still too fresh. Trace looked stunned. How did you? I watched you, Rosalie said simply. At the cabin. I saw the real Trace Mallory, not the silent, brooding man everyone in Cedar Bluff thinks they know. She reached up, gently touching his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. And that man, the real you, is who I love. Trace caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. His eyes closed briefly as if savoring her touch. Rosalie, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I never thought, after Mary, after failing to save her, I didn't think I deserved happiness. Rosalie finished for him. Love? You deserve both, Trace, more than anyone I've ever known. He opened his eyes, looking at her with such intensity it took her breath away. I love you too, he said softly. God help me, I do. The simple declaration, spoken in his deep, quiet voice, filled Rosalie with a joy so profound it brought fresh tears to her eyes. Then we'll face whatever comes together, she said. Blackwood, my father, the whole world if need be. Trace smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his face. Together, he agreed. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Rosalie didn't want to pull away. She met him halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss so tender it made her heart ache. It was a beginning, a promise, a declaration, everything a first kiss should be. When they finally parted, both were breathless, gazing at each other with wonder. We should rest, Trace said reluctantly. We have a long journey ahead. Rosalie nodded, though she was reluctant to break the moment. Your arm needs tending, and the horses need care too. They made a simple camp in the hollow, hobbling the horses so they could graze and rest. Trace's wound had stopped bleeding, but he was clearly in pain, though he tried to hide it. They shared the last of their food, a few strips of jerky and a handful of dried berries Trace had packed. As the sun climbed higher, they took turns keeping watch while the other slept. Rosalie insisted Trace rest first, and to her surprise, he didn't argue, a testament to how exhausted and hurt he truly was. She watched him sleep, his face peaceful despite the dirt and blood, his dark hair falling across his forehead. Love swelled in her heart, along with a fierce determination to protect him as he had protected her. When it was her turn to rest, she dreamed of a small cabin in a green valley, smoke rising from the chimney, horses grazing in a meadow, and Trace, standing in the doorway, waiting for her with that rare, beautiful smile. She woke to his hand on her shoulder, his voice low and urgent. Rosalie, wake up, we need to go. She sat up quickly, instantly alert. What is it? Are they back? Trace shook his head, already saddling the horses. Not yet, but I heard something. Riders, still far off but heading this way. Rosalie helped him finish preparing the horses, noticing how he favored his injured arm. How bad is it? She asked, nodding toward the wound. I'll manage, he said, but his face was pale beneath the dirt and stubble. They mounted up, Trace grimacing as he swung into the saddle. Grief seemed better after the rest, no longer favoring his injured leg so obviously. Lily was fresh and eager, dancing a bit as Rosalie settled on her back. "Which way?" Rosalie asked, looking around the hollow. Trace pointed north. "We keep following. The stream. It leads to a pass through the mountains. On the other side is open country, harder to track us there." They rode at a steady pace, conserving the horses' strength. The forest began to thin as they climbed higher, the trees becoming more sparse, the ground rockier. By midday they reached a high meadow filled with wildflowers, a stunning vista of mountains spreading out before them. "It's beautiful," Rosalie breathed, reining in Lily to take in the view. Trace nodded, but his attention was focused behind them. "We're being followed," he said grimly. "Two riders. Moving fast." Rosalie turned in the saddle, following his gaze. Far below, she could just make out tiny figures on horseback, working their way up the trail they had followed. "How did they find us so quickly?" she asked. "Good trackers," Trace said, "or lucky. Either way, we need to keep moving." They urged their horses forward, crossing the meadow and beginning the ascent to the pass Trace had mentioned. The trail grew steeper, narrower, winding between massive boulders and along the edges of dizzying drops. Rosalie tried not to look down, focusing instead on Trace's back as he led the way. But she couldn't help noticing how he swayed slightly in the saddle, how his left arm hung limply at his side. "Trace," she called, concern sharpening her voice. "Are you all right?" He half turned, offering her a reassuring nod, but Rosalie wasn't convinced. His face was ashen, his eyes glassy with what she now recognized as fever. The wound must be infected. They needed to stop, to tend to his arm properly. But with pursuers closing in, there was no time. As they neared the top of the pass, Trace suddenly slumped forward in the saddle. Grief, sensing something wrong, stopped immediately. "Trace!" Rosalie cried, guiding Lily alongside the stallion. Trace straightened with visible effort. "I'm all right," he insisted. "Just dizzy for a moment." "You're burning with fever," Rosalie said, reaching out to touch his face. "We need to stop." "Can't," Trace said, nodding back the way they had come. "They're too close." Rosalie looked back and saw he was right. The pursuers had gained ground, now clearly visible on the trail below. Even from this distance, she could see they were heavily armed. "Just a little further," Trace urged. "Over the pass, then we'll find a place to rest." Reluctantly, Rosalie nodded. They continued on, reaching the top of the pass as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. From this vantage point, they could see for miles in all directions. Behind them, the forested mountains they had traversed. Ahead, a vast expanse of rolling hills and open plains. "There," Trace said, pointing to a cluster of buildings in the far distance. "Trading post. We can find help there." But it was at least a day's ride away, and Rosalie wasn't sure Trace could stay in the saddle that long. His condition was deteriorating rapidly, the infection taking hold despite her best efforts to clean the wound. They began the descent from the pass, the trail slightly easier on this side but still treacherous. Trace was visibly struggling now, his body rigid with the effort to stay upright. "Trace," Rosalie said, riding close beside him. "Let me help you." Before he could respond, a shot rang out, echoing off the mountains. A bullet struck the rock face near them, sending fragments flying. "They're in range!" Trace exclaimed, immediately alert despite his condition. "Ride, Rosalie, now!" He urged Grief into a gallop, and Rosalie followed on Lily, both horses sure-footed despite the steep trail. More shots followed, but they were moving targets now, harder to hit from a distance. They rounded a bend in the trail, momentarily out of sight of their pursuers. Ahead, the path split, one branch continuing down the mountainside, the other leading to a small plateau where a stand of trees offered some cover. "This way," Trace called, taking the path toward the trees. They reached the plateau, the horses breathing hard from the exertion. Trace dismounted with difficulty, nearly falling as his feet hit the ground. "We can defend this position," he said, drawing his rifle. "They'll have to come up that trail and we'll see them coming." Rosalie looked at him with growing alarm. He was swaying on his feet, his eyes unfocused. The fever was taking a stronger hold. "Trace, you need to rest," she insisted, helping him to a fallen log in the shelter of the trees. He didn't resist, which frightened her more than anything. Trace Mallory was not a man who easily accepted help. Just for a minute, he agreed, his voice weak. Then we need to be ready. Rosalie unsaddled the horses, giving them water from a small spring that trickled from the rocks. Then she returned to Trace, finding him slumped against a tree trunk, his rifle across his knees. "Let me see your arm," she said gently. He allowed her to unwrap the bandage. The wound was angry and inflamed, red streaks spreading from it. Blood poisoning. Without proper medicine, Trace was in serious danger. "It's bad, isn't it?" he asked, watching her face. Rosalie couldn't lie to him. "Yes," she admitted. "You need a doctor." Trace nodded, his eyes surprisingly clear despite the fever. "I thought as much." He looked toward the trail they had just climbed. "They'll be here soon." Rosalie followed his gaze. "How many bullets do you have left?" "6, Trace said. "Not enough if they're determined." He looked at her, his expression grave. "Rosalie, I need you to listen carefully. When they come, I want you to take Lily and ride for that trading post. Don't look back. Don't stop for anything." "No," Rosalie said immediately, knowing what he was suggesting. "I won't leave you." "You have to," Trace insisted, his voice stronger now, fueled by urgency. "I can hold them off, give you a head start." "And then what?" Rosalie demanded. "They'll kill you." "Trace, maybe," he acknowledged, "but you'll be free." Tears filled Rosalie's eyes. "What kind of freedom would that be, knowing you died for me?" Trace reached for her hand, his grip surprisingly strong despite his weakness. "The kind I promised you," he said softly. "The chance to choose your own path." "I've made my choice," Rosalie said fiercely. "I choose you, Trace Mallory. I choose us, together." She stood, determination replacing fear. "We're both leaving this mountain, now, before they—" "Get here," Trace shook his head. "I can barely sit a horse, Rosalie. I'd slow you down." "Then we'll ride double," she insisted. "Lily can carry us both to the trading post." "And Grief?" Trace asked. "I won't leave him," Rosalie thought quickly. "We'll take him too. I can lead him while you ride with me." Trace looked, as if he wanted to argue further, but the sound of hooves on the trail below stopped him. Their pursuers were getting closer. "Help me up," he said finally. Rosalie supported him as he stood, alarmed at how heavily he leaned on her. His skin burned, with fever, but his eyes were clear and determined. Together they made their way to where Lily waited. With Rosalie's help, Trace managed to mount the mare. Rosalie swung up behind him, one arm around his waist to keep him steady, the other holding Lily's reins. She took Grief's lead rope as well, the stallion following obediently. "Ready?" she asked, her mouth close to Trace's ear. He nodded, his body rigid with the effort to stay upright. "Ready." They rode across the plateau toward a game trail Trace had spotted earlier, a narrow path that led down the far side of the mountain, away from their pursuers. It was steep and dangerous, but it offered a chance. As they reached the trail, shouts erupted behind them. Their pursuers had reached the plateau and spotted them. "Ride," Trace urged. Rosalie nudged Lily forward, the mare picking her way carefully down the steep path. Grief followed, equally careful. Behind them, more shouts, then the crack of gunfire. But they were already around a bend in the trail, protected by the mountainside. Rosalie kept Lily moving steadily, not too fast on the treacherous terrain, but never stopping. Trace grew heavier against her, his consciousness fading as the fever took a stronger hold. Rosalie tightened her arm around him, holding him securely against her. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Please, Trace, stay with me." As the sun sank toward the horizon, painting the mountains in gold and crimson, Rosalie Quinn rode toward an uncertain future, the man she loved cradled in her arms, and enemies at their backs. But for the first time since fleeing Cedar Bluff, she felt not just determination, but hope. They had found each other in the chaos of flight and pursuit. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The trading post was still far away, a distant promise of safety. The night was falling, cold and dark, but Rosalie rode on, guided by the faint light of the first evening star, the same star she remembered from Trace's mother's diary that had guided his father through the mountains all those years ago. "Follow the star, Lily," she murmured to the mare. "Take us home." Behind them on the mountain trail came the distant sound of pursuit, but ahead lay hope and healing, and perhaps, if they were brave enough, lucky enough, a future together. Rosalie held Trace closer, feeling his heartbeat against her arm, and rode toward that future with every ounce of courage she possessed. Night had fallen completely by the time Rosalie reached level ground at the base of the mountain. The trail had been treacherous in the darkness, but Lily had proved sure-footed and steady. Grief followed behind, occasionally nickering softly as if encouraging them onward. Trace was burning with fever in Rosalie's arms. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring words she couldn't understand, other times lying so still against her that she had to check his breathing to reassure herself he was still alive. "Hold on," she whispered against his hair. "Just hold on, Trace." In the distance, the lights of the trading post beckoned like stars fallen to earth. It was still miles away across open country, but the sight gave Rosalie hope. If she could get Trace there, find a doctor or at least medicine. Behind them, she could no longer hear the sounds of pursuit. Perhaps their pursuers had lost the trail in the darkness, or maybe they'd decided to wait for daylight rather than risk the dangerous mountain path at night. Either way, Rosalie knew the reprieve was temporary. She rode through the night, keeping Lily at a steady walk to conserve the mare's strength. The moon rose, casting the landscape in silver light, making it easier to pick their way across the unfamiliar terrain. Trace grew heavier against her, his fever burning hotter. Near dawn, when the trading post was close enough that Rosalie could make out individual buildings, Trace stirred in her arms. "Rosalie," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I'm here," she said, relief washing through her. "We're almost at the trading post. You're going to be all right." He shifted, trying to look at her despite his weakness. "You should have left me," he said. "Safer for you." "Not a chance," Rosalie replied firmly. "We stick together, remember?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips before his eyes fluttered closed again. The trading post came to life as the sun rose. Rosalie could see people moving between the buildings, a general store, a stable, a few small cabins, and what looked like a saloon. As she approached, a man stepped out of the stable, staring at the unusual sight of a woman riding double with an unconscious man leading a black stallion behind. "Help!" Rosalie called, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "Please, he's been shot. He needs a doctor." The man, middle-aged, with a weathered face and kind eyes, hurried forward. "Samuel Wade," he introduced himself, reaching up to help ease Trace from the saddle. "There's no doctor here, but I know something about bullet wounds." Rosalie's heart leaped. "Samuel Wade, Trace told me to ask for you. He said you'd help us." Wade looked more closely at the injured man, recognition dawning on his face. "Trace Mallory." "Good Lord, what happened to him?" "Bounty hunters," Rosalie explained as they carried Trace toward one of the small cabins. "We've been running for days. His wound is infected." Inside the cabin, they laid Trace on a narrow bed. His face was flushed with fever, his breathing shallow. "I'll need hot water, clean cloths," Wade said, already rolling up his sleeves. "And I've got some medicines that might help, if we're not too late." "We're not too late," Rosalie said fiercely. "He's going to live." Wade gave her an appraising look, noting her determination. "You must be Rosalie Quinn," he said, surprising her. "News travels, even out here. They say you stole a horse and ran away from a wedding." "I stole his horse," Rosalie admitted, nodding toward Trace. "The rest is complicated." "Always is," Wade said with a hint of a smile. "Look, I'll do what I can for him, but you should know. There have been men asking questions around here. Men working for Harold Blackwood." Rosalie felt a chill. "How did they know to look here?" "Blackwood's got people all over the territory," Wade explained, examining Trace's wound with careful hands. "Word gets around. They were here 2 days ago, said they'd be back." "Then we need to leave as soon as Trace is able," Rosalie said, though the thought of putting him through more travel made her heart ache. Wade shook his head. "He won't be traveling anytime soon. Not if he's going to live." He looked at her gravely. "That wound needs proper tending and he needs rest. Moving him now would kill him for sure." Rosalie sank into a chair beside the bed, the exhaustion of the past days catching up to her. Then we'll stay until he's better, she decided. I'll find a way to keep us safe. I'll help how I can, Wade promised. Trace once did me a good turn. I don't forget such things. For the next 2 days, Rosalie barely left Trace's side. Wade provided medicines, herbs to draw out the infection, powders to bring down the fever. Slowly, Trace's condition began to improve. The angry red streaks retreated, the wound began to heal, and on the 3rd morning he woke with clear eyes for the first time since their desperate escape. "Rosalie," he called, his voice weak but lucid. She was at his side instantly, taking his hand. "I'm here. We made it to the trading post. Samuel Wade is helping us." Relief washed over Trace's face. "Samuel's a good man, trustworthy. He said you once did him a favor," Rosalie said. A hint of a smile touched Trace's lips. "His son got in trouble with some rough men in Cedar Bluff. I helped him out of it. By which he means he fought 3 armed men to save my fool boy," Wade said, entering the cabin with a tray of food. "Nearly got himself killed doing it too." He set the tray down beside the bed. "Good to see you awake, Mallory. That girl of yours hasn't slept more than an hour at a stretch since you got here." Trace's eyes found Rosalie's, a question in them. "That girl of mine," Rosalie felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I might have let him believe, that is, I didn't correct him when he assumed that you two are together," Wade finished for her, a twinkle in his eye. "Don't worry, your secret's safe with me, though it's hardly a secret the way she fusses over you." After Wade left, Trace looked at Rosalie with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "You shouldn't have stayed," he said softly. "It's not safe." "I'm exactly where I want to be," Rosalie replied firmly. Trace's hand tightened around hers. "Thank you," he said simply, "for not leaving me on that mountain." "I told you," Rosalie said, leaning forward to brush a lock of hair from his forehead. "I choose us, together." The tenderness in his eyes made her heart swell. But before he could respond, the door opened and Wade hurried in, his expression grim. "Riders coming," he said. "5 men, heavily armed, Blackwood's men, I'd wager." Rosalie's blood ran cold. "How long do we have?" "Minutes," Wade replied. "They're almost here." Trace struggled to sit up. "My rifle—" "You're in no condition to fight," Rosalie said, gently but firmly pushing him back against the pillows. "And we're outnumbered anyway." She stood, a determined expression on her face. "I need to end this." "Rosalie, no," Trace protested, guessing her intention. "Whatever you're thinking, it's the only way," she said. "If I go back willingly, they'll leave you alone. You'll be safe." "I don't want safety without you," Trace said, his voice gaining strength from desperation. "We'll find another way." But Rosalie had made up her mind. She leaned down and kissed him gently. "I love you, Trace Mallory," she whispered against his lips. "Enough to keep you safe even from yourself." Before he could stop her, she straightened and turned to Wade. "Is there a back way out?" Wade nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Through the storeroom. But girl, are you sure about this?" "I'm sure," Rosalie said with a calm she didn't feel. "I won't have anyone else hurt because of me." "Rosalie," Trace called as she headed for the door. "Don't do this." She paused, looking back at him one last time, memorizing his face. The blue, eyes now dark with anguish, the strong line of his jaw, the mouth that had kissed her so tenderly. "Thank you for showing me what freedom really means," she said softly, "and what love can be." Then she was gone, slipping through the back of the cabin and circling around to the front of the trading post, where the riders were just arriving in a cloud of dust. Rosalie recognized 2 of them, men who had been at the trapper's cabin. They spotted her immediately, hands moving to their guns. "Wait," she called, stepping forward with her hands raised. "I'll go back, just don't hurt him." The lead rider, a hard-faced man with a scar across his chin, looked her over with cold eyes. "The horse thief, he's here." "He's wounded," Rosalie said. "He can't hurt anyone. Leave him be, and I'll come peacefully." The man considered this, clearly, weighing the $100 bounty against the satisfaction of punishing the man who had defied them. Finally, he nodded. "All right, Miss Quinn, you come with us and we'll leave your boyfriend be." His thin smile suggested he wasn't being entirely truthful, but Rosalie had no choice but to trust him. I need a moment, she said, to get my things. The man nodded. Don't try anything foolish, we'll be watching. Rosalie walked slowly back toward the cabin, intending to collect her small bundle of possessions and say a final goodbye to Trace. But as she approached, she heard raised voices inside. Quickening her pace, she pushed open the door to find Trace, on his feet, leaning heavily against the wall, arguing with Wade. I won't let her do this, Trace was saying, his face pale with effort and pain. Give me my gun, Samuel. You can barely stand, man, Wade protested. You'll get yourself killed. Then I'll die on my feet, Trace said grimly. He turned as Rosalie entered, his eyes lighting with a mixture of relief and determination. Rosalie, he said, straightening as best he could, you're not going with them. I have to, she insisted. They'll kill you otherwise. Let them try, Trace said, his voice hard. Before Rosalie could argue further, the cabin door burst open behind her. The scarred man stood there, his patience clearly at an end. Time's up, Miss Quinn, he said. We're leaving, now. Trace moved forward, positioning himself between Rosalie and the bounty hunter despite his weakness. She's not going anywhere, he said. The man's hand moved to his gun. Don't be stupid, Mallory. There's 5 of us and 1 of you, and from the looks of it, a stiff breeze would knock you over. Maybe, Trace acknowledged. But I'll take at least 1 of you with me. You want to be the one? A tense silence filled the cabin. Rosalie could see the calculation in the bounty hunter's eyes. Was the risk worth the reward? All right, the man said finally. We'll take you both back to Blackwood. Let him sort it out. He smiled cruelly. I hear he's got special plans for... You, Mallory? Something about a public hanging for horse theft and kidnapping? Trace didn't flinch. I'm sure he does. Rosalie couldn't bear it any longer. She stepped forward, moving toward the bounty hunter. I'll go back, she said clearly. Just don't hurt him. As she walked to the men, Trace's voice, steady, broken, rang out behind her. You stole my horse. Now you're trying to steal my... Heart back and leave me with nothing. Rosalie turned, tears filling her eyes at the raw emotion in his voice. The lead bounty man grabbed her arm roughly. Let's go, he growled. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Trace lunged forward. Wade shouted a warning, and the bounty hunter's hand went for his gun. Rosalie saw the glint of metal as the weapon cleared its holster. A gunshot echoed through the small cabin. Someone fell. Rosalie screamed, breaking free from the bounty hunter's grip and rushing toward Trace, certain he had been shot. But it wasn't. Trace, who lay on the cabin floor. It was the scarred man, blood spreading across his chest from a wound over his heart. In the doorway stood an imposing figure, a tall man in an expensive suit, a smoking pistol in his hand. That's enough, said Harold Blackwood. I'll handle this myself. Rosalie froze, staring at the man she had fled Cedar Bluff to escape. He looked exactly as she remembered. Tall, well-groomed, his silver hair impeccably styled, his cold eyes assessing everything with the calculation of a man who saw the world in terms of profit and loss. Mr. Blackwood, she said, her voice barely, above a whisper. Rosalie, he replied with a slight nod. You've led us on quite a chase. His eyes moved to Trace, who was leaning against the wall, clearly struggling to stay on his feet. So this is the man who helped you escape, the horse thief. He's not a thief, Rosalie said fiercely. I took his horse. He came after me. Blackwood raised an eyebrow. And then harbored you for weeks, from what I hear. Because I asked him to, Rosalie insisted. None of this is his fault. Blackwood considered this, his expression unreadable. Interesting, he said finally. You're willing to take all the blame to protect him. He glanced at the fallen bounty hunter. Unfortunately, Simpson here had other ideas. He sent word that Mallory had compromised you, that you were ruined. The way he said the word made Rosalie's skin crawl, but she lifted her chin defiantly. And if I am? A flash of anger crossed Blackwood's face, quickly masked. Then our arrangement would be void, of course. I require a pure bride. Then we have no arrangement, Rosalie said firmly, because I love Trace Mallory, and I choose him. Blackwood's cold eyes moved between Rosalie and Trace, taking in their closeness. The protective way Trace tried to step forward despite his weakness. I see. he said coldly. And you, Mallory, do you love her enough to die for her? Because that's what horse theft and kidnapping will get you in Cedar Bluff. I didn't steal anything, Trace said, his voice weak but steady. And the only one who tried to take Rosalie's freedom was you, Blackwood. You and her father, treating her like property to be traded. Blackwood's hand tightened on his gun. Brave words for a man at my mercy. The remaining bounty hunters had filed into the cabin, surrounding them. Wade stood to one side, his expression troubled but helpless. Mr. Blackwood, Rosalie said, deliberately, softening her voice. You're a businessman. Surely we can reach an agreement that benefits everyone. Blackwood looked at her with new interest. I'm listening. Let Trace go free, Rosalie said. Drop all charges against him. In return, she took a deep breath. In return, I'll come back to Cedar Bluff with you. Rosalie, no, Trace protested. She silenced him with a look. Not as your bride, she continued to Blackwood, but to face whatever consequences my father deems appropriate for running away. Blackwood considered this, clearly intrigued by her offer. And what do I gain from this arrangement? Besides the pleasure of your company on the ride back to Cedar Bluff, your reputation remains intact, Rosalie pointed out. You can tell everyone you ended our engagement because I proved unworthy, not because I rejected you. Your pride is preserved. A hint of a smile touched Blackwood's thin lips. Clever girl. You understand what matters to a man in my position. He holstered his gun, making his decision. Very well, Mallory goes free, charges dropped. You return to face your father's judgment. A fair trade. No, Trace said, pushing himself away from the wall despite his obvious pain. I won't let you. Do this, Rosalie. It's not your decision, she said gently. It's mine, my choice. Then I choose to come with you, Trace insisted. Whatever happens, we face it together. Blackwood watched this exchange with cool amusement. How touching, he said dryly, but unnecessary. Edgar Quinn has already made his decision regarding his daughter's punishment. Rosalie turned to him, sudden fear gripping her heart. What? Do you mean? Your father died 3 days ago, Blackwood said, his voice devoid of sympathy. Heart failure, they said. The shock and shame of his daughter's disgrace was too much for him. Rosalie felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath her feet. Father is dead? She whispered. Blackwood nodded. Which means, my dear, that you are now the sole heir to the Quinn property and holdings. Quite a substantial inheritance, I'm told. Understanding dawned on Rosalie. This was why Blackwood had come himself, why he hadn't simply sent his men to bring her back. With her father dead, she was worth far more as an heiress than as a runaway bride. So you see, Blackwood continued smoothly, our arrangement needs to be renegotiated. There is no arrangement, Trace said, moving to Rosalie's side despite the bounty hunter's threatening postures. Rosalie is free to make her own choices now. Blackwood's expression hardened. I've invested too much in this pursuit to walk away empty-handed, Mallory. Then name your price, Trace said, for dropping the charges against me, for leaving Rosalie in peace. Blackwood laughed, a cold sound without humor. You? What could you possibly offer me that would be worth more than the Quinn fortune? My land, Trace said simply. 300 acres in the North Valley, water rights included. Rosalie stared at him in shock. Trace, no. That's all you have. Not all, he said, his eyes never leaving hers. Not anymore. Blackwood looked intrigued, despite himself. The North Valley, you say? Near the new railroad line? Trace nodded. Prime land, worth a small fortune to the right buyer. Blackwood considered this, clearly weighing the immediate gain against the potential of the Quinn inheritance. After seeing a long moment, he made his decision. The land and $50 cash, he said, for dropping the charges and relinquishing any claim on Miss Quinn. Done, Trace said without hesitation. Trace, you can't, Rosalie protested. That land is your future. He turned to her, his blue eyes full of a certainty that took her breath away. You're my future, Rosalie, if you'll have me. Before she could respond, the door of the cabin burst open once more. A man stood there, tall, distinguished, with a badge pinned to his vest. Federal Marshal James Harker, he announced. And I believe I'm interrupting something. Blackwood's expression soured. This is a private matter, Marshal. Not when it involves bounties for kidnapping, it isn't, the marshal replied calmly. Especially when the supposed victim is standing here of her own free will. He turned to Rosalie. Miss Quinn, were you kidnapped by this man? No, Rosalie said firmly. I left Cedar Bluff voluntarily. Trace helped me, that's all. The marshal nodded, unsurprised. And the horse theft? I took his horse, Rosalie admitted. He came after me to get it back. I see, the marshal said, his eyes moving to the dead bounty hunter on the floor. And this? Self-defense. Wade spoke up from the corner. The man drew first. I'm a witness. Blackwood's hand twitched toward his gun, but the marshal fixed him with a stern look. I wouldn't if I were you, Mr. Blackwood. Assaulting a federal officer carries a hefty sentence. Blackwood's face twisted with barely suppressed rage, but he kept his hand away from his weapon. This isn't over, he said coldly. Yes, it is, the marshal replied. You're going to return to Cedar Bluff and withdraw any bounties or charges against these people, or I'll be very interested in investigating how your men came to be hunting civilians across 3 counties. For a tense moment, Blackwood looked as if he might defy the marshal. Then, with a cold smile, he inclined his head. As you wish, Marshal, but remember, we all have to live in this territory together. Paths have a way of crossing again. With that veiled threat, he turned and left the cabin, his remaining men following. In the sudden quiet that followed, Rosalie turned to Trace, who had sagged against the wall in exhaustion. It's over, she asked, hardly daring to believe it. The Marshal nodded, for now at least. Blackwood's a powerful man, but even he won't cross a federal badge. He looked at Trace with concern. You need to get back in that bed, son. You look like death warmed over. Rosalie helped Trace back to the bed, where he sank down with a groan of relief. The marshal watched them with a thoughtful expression. So, what now for you two? He asked. Rosalie looked at Trace, the question hanging between them. So much had happened. So much had changed. Her father was gone. The threat of forced marriage was lifted. She was free, truly free, to choose her own path. I don't know, she admitted. I suppose I should return to Cedar Bluff eventually, to settle my father's affairs. And after that? Trace asked, his voice soft with hope and uncertainty. Rosalie took his hand, entwining their fingers. After that, I was thinking of finding a piece of land. Somewhere with a stream, maybe. A place to build a cabin. A slow smile spread across Trace's face, transforming it from haggard to handsome in an instant. I know a good spot, he said. In a valley not far from here, protected by mountains on 3 sides with the best sunrise view in the territory. Sounds perfect, Rosalie said, returning his smile. Though I'd need help building that cabin. I happen to be good with my hands, Trace replied, his eyes never leaving hers. The marshal cleared his throat, reminding them of his presence. Well, I can see you two have plans to make. I'll be in town for a few days if you need anything. He tipped his hat and left, closing. The door behind him, Wade followed, giving them a wink. I'll check on you later. Make sure you rest, Mallory. Alone at last, Rosalie sat on the edge of the bed beside Trace. Did you mean it? She asked. About your land being worth less to you than I am? Trace reached up to touch her face, his fingers gentle against her cheek. I meant every word. Land can be bought, Rosalie, but what we have, that's beyond price. Tears filled her eyes, not of sadness but of overwhelming joy. I love you, Trace Mallory. And I love you, Rosalie Quinn, he replied, pulling her down for a tender kiss. Outside the cabin window, the sun was setting in a blaze of gold and crimson. In the stable nearby, Grief and Lily stood side by side, as if they too understood that their journey had reached not an end, but a beginning. 3 months later, a small cabin stood in the protected valley Trace had described. Smoke curled from the chimney and 2 horses grazed in a meadow nearby, a black stallion and a chestnut mare. Inside, Rosalie hung a small sampler over the fireplace, her first attempt at needlework since she was a girl. It read simply, "Freedom isn't distance, it's choosing who you ride beside." Trace came in from chopping wood, his strength fully returned, his blue eyes bright with health and happiness. He paused to admire the sampler, then wrapped his arms around Rosalie from behind. "Wise words," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Where did you hear them?" Rosalie turned in his arms, smiling up at the man who had become her husband in a simple ceremony at the trading post just a month before. From a quiet cowboy who once offered water to a desperate girl with dirt on, her nightdress and a stolen horse between her knees, Trace laughed, a free, joyous sound that still surprised her each time she heard it. "Best horse theft in the history of the territory," he declared. "Best horse thief," Rosalie corrected, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Outside, the sun shone bright on their small homestead, a place built not on wealth or status, but on choice, and love and the courage to ride toward freedom, side by side. The end.